attacking of my family. I remember waking up one weekend and pictures of my house were planted everywhere as I was living in this mansion in Cape Town. And all
Is this the
sorts
house that
of,
I dropped off the shoes at?
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
So
I can
it is a
confirm
mansion, right?
it's not a mansion.
You know what I mean? Like,
I was actually surprised how, if I say humble, the house was.
but the front page was Maimani's mansion. It was so unbelievable.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But there's something I want to know, right? South Africa's elections are just around the corner. But for some reason, this year it feels different.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
For a number of reasons, right? Like the first is, I think, no one is convinced anyone is going to get an outright majority, which I think is an incredible thing. For the first time in the history of this country, the ANC is not guaranteed a majority. So there's excitement because now there's uncertainty. You know, we are all going in there. Secondly, I think South Africans are spoiled for choice, you know. And this election, in many ways, is a choice between old and dying and new and vibrant. So when I think about the ANC-DA combo, you can feel it's old, it's tired, old ideas, backward-looking, that kind of sense. I think that's what people are feeling. And then you're getting a lot of new, exciting parties coming up. I think for me, it's been personally exciting because we've been able to fight for the things we genuinely believe in. Like, I believe in building one South Africa. I believe in making sure that this country doesn't remain one that is dual, where like other people have a lot of people working and other people have no one working. Let's get more people working. That's why I talk about a job in every home. I want more people working, not less. And so for me, it's quite an exciting election. I think, you know, as we saw international votes and the turnout that's starting to happen there.
I'm seeing huge lines.
I think we're going to be surprised in South Africa as we see more of the same. And liberation parties, after 30 years, almost you feel like citizens are looking at them and going, you've had 30 years and this is where we're at. I don't think we can carry on like this.
So also when I meant it feels different, right? I think what feels different to me, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but for me, what feels different is I sense like some desperation on a lot of fronts. Desperation on from the people of South Africa wanting change, desperation from political parties trying to hold power or gain more power by discrediting. And I mean, I think that's always the case. But why do you think people are so desperate for change now?
Because I think conditions in South Africa are hard. If I'm honest with myself, you know, 2/3 of young people cannot find a job. That is hard. That is the highest in the world. It's a condition upon which no young person wants to face up to, the way they don't feel like their prospects are there. 40% of our youth drop out of school before they get to matric. That is a frightening reality. Of the 2/3 of all the unemployed people in this country, 90% of them don't actually have a matric. So those conditions, because all education gives you is a prospect of a future. It doesn't guarantee you a future, but it lets you imagine a possibility of one. So you can imagine a whole lot of youth are thinking that. On another level, I think South Africans are feeling progressively unsafe. And we feel that way when you look up and you see crime stats, when you see that 75 of our fellow South Africans were killed every single day. That is a worrying thought, right? We also, at the same time, can see things that materially affect us every day. You know, when a government is running out of money, you don't really feel it until actually the lights come off. It's like in a home. You know, you don't know money is getting scarce until someone looks you in the eye and says, we're not going to pay for electricity this month, or we're not going to pay for water. And sometimes if you think about a country in that way, when the lights go off, South Africans can feel the pressure thereof. Because when the lights go off, no businesses run, no kids go to school. In cities like Johannesburg, sewage infrastructure stops working, so water becomes a problem. So there is the conditions upon which citizens are starting to feel. And what I think also exacerbates that is that you then walk around and you see other South Africans who have maybe in some ways feel like, they've gotten boreholes, they've gotten solar, they've gotten this. And so when you've got that duality, it adds even more, because people can all be collectively desperate. But when they feel like others are exempt from that, that adds to the anxiety that citizens feel. And so it's not to resent anyone. It's not to resent wealthy. It's not to resent any of that. It's just that I want that for everybody. And I can appreciate the desperation that comes with that. I myself, at a personal level, sometimes I'm a father of 2 girls, you know. My eldest, this is how you know you're starting to feel a little bit old. My eldest is about to start high school. So then you think to yourself, man, what school is she going to go to? What university is she going to go to? Will she be safe? Will she ever be able to find a job in this country? And then you come back to going, heck, I better do something, right? So that's the impression that I think all of us as citizens are feeling.
One of the things that I asked Jordan Lewis when he came onto the show was, do you think that there will ever be a South Africa where no one is living in a shack? Do you think that is possible? What do you say to that? He said he doesn't see a future for that happening.
I think it's something we've got to get right. Let's understand where, on 2 fronts. The first is actually the period 1990 from 2000 to 2008, and you'd think I'm a spokesperson for another party. Actually, the government was building more houses than it was than shacks being erected. So it's possible to get ahead of it, right? So that was historically so. What has happened in South Africa is that because you've got a poor governance framework, what delivers someone in a shack is uncontrolled urban migration and urban sprawl. So what effectively happens is that, 1, it's too expensive to go to and from places of work. So what happens is that people create temporary shelter, which is either through being homeless or through shacks. They move from various other parts of the country in search of work opportunities. This is the same for Johannesburg, Cape Town, eThekwini. And then the only places that are vacant land are often in the periphery of not only economic activity, but cities. So people settle there. And then the other last thing that is complicating is that once people have settled there, they want to invite services from whatever the city, the government is. So you want water, electricity, etc. The reversal of that to get ahead of it is actually, I hold on to this lifelong dream that says the future of Africa is about building more cities. Parallel to that, if you think about it, China is a good example. China is now more than over 1 billion people that are Chinese in that sense. And they understood this problem. They understood the problem of the fact that they'd have profound net migration. They adopted policies, some of which I disagree with. But the one thing they did without a shadow of a doubt is they emphasized infrastructure build, and they proceeded to rail down in building more and more cities. And so when you build cities, you are able to create places where suddenly people aren't living in shacks. People can live in houses. So now let's come back to Johannesburg as a good example. You've got the most recent rail project that we've built is the Gautrain. And when you look around all the nodes of the station, whether it's Rhodesfield, whether it's Midrand, whether it's wherever, along transport hubs, people build. So one of the ways you can do this is actually to say to yourself, what if as a government and as a country, we could focus on 2 areas. Build transport infrastructure, because in transport infrastructure, you can move. People feel like there's a possibility they can live far from cities and get to work. That's an important thing. So someone doesn't have to feel like the only way I'll be able to make the most money or the most of my money is to live closer to the city. They can live far and travel in. London has exactly the same problem. If you think about it, people live far, but they've got good public transport, they can get into the city. And if we build good infrastructure in hybrid learning, all of that, what's to stop someone from working from home? So that's the first. The second is, let's build more cities. Let's build more cities. Let's be ambitious as a country to say, what if we put a city here, a city there? Immediately, you direct where migration is going. For Cape Town's purposes, demographic studies are indicating the fact that less and less people want to live closer to the city bowl. They'll actually want to live further and further away because technology allows you to do so, and actually economic opportunities can be presented there. So let's as a country not settle for what we have. Let's be bold. Let's be bold. And as a continent, collectively, we are facing the same problem that China was facing. We're going to head towards 1.2 billion people by 2040, which means that in essence, we have to move 300 million people out of poverty to the middle class, or this continent is going to face some difficult days. And I think for the continent of Africa, we need to be building 50 cities in that same period of time for the continent writ large. And therefore, South Africa needs to be able to build a few of those so that we can begin to deal with this housing backlog, or at least urban sprawl question. In as far as permanent housing is concerned, I think the government is wrong to believe that it must build everyone a house. I don't think that's a good idea. You're not sitting here waiting for the government to build you a house. You are wanting to earn enough money to build your own house. So the option is available for the poor. What we've got to do is say to ourselves, rather than the state being the one who builds people houses, why don't we just say we'll become the bank upon which poor people can come and access capital, which is like vouchers, and they can build for themselves. Our family needs are different.
How do you think the South African elections are going to play out? What is your prediction? And I want an honest prediction.
I think the ANC will probably get about 45% or somewhere there. I think that we're going to have... I think the DA will remain the same, if not less. I think the EFF maybe might pick up 1 or 2 votes or percentage points from their previous elections. I think MK is overbaked. I think we will do well in the sense that our offering is coming from South Africans. And I think what will probably, and this is what I want to see happen, is a grand coalition of the opposition. And so we are playing that role of being that anchor party that brings South Africans together to be able to form a government of the future. So that's what we're working on.
So, I mean, if you could guess for Bossa, right, what do you think the percentage you guys will get will be?
We, at a minimum, want to get 5% or so. And that's a big task for a party that started out. But that's what we want to get above that. That's what we're working towards.
What I like about your answer is you didn't say, we're going to win. You know, because I like that you're being realistic, and I think that would be a great achievement for such a new party, right?
I mean, you know, when we kicked off, ideally, I'd want to get closer to 10%, like so 5 to 10%. But the achievement of that would be a significant issue, given the fact that when you rank parties, the NC at 45, the DA at 20, the EFF at about 10, 12, to get about 5 to 10 is an impressive beginning.
For sure.
So whenever people ask me, what are you aiming for? I say, I want to play Champions League. Now, if you follow football, and I'm a Liverpool supporter, and I think we've done as well as Arsenal, may I say this on here? But the truth is, you want to be in the top 4 teams in the country. That's what we want to be, because the contest for South Africa, whenever people think, who am I competing with? I'm not competing with the ANC or the DA. I'm competing with the new, which is the EFF. So I've got to do my best to make sure that we can beat the EFF. And not because I hate Julius on another end. It's fundamentally because I think his values, if he's allowed to grow, he won't have to govern outright by a majority, but his values will dictate where the big parties go. And that's a very, very dangerous space to be, because you can quickly chase after those voters who are going to him and promise them the things he's promising. And you could have problems as a nation, because the things he's promising and the invitation he's putting out are not going to be good for our economy. It's a bit like parties who stand up publicly, and I hear it's become a very populist thing now. No, we're going to put them in buses and lock them away and send foreigners out of this country. And sometimes I think you sound like you're going to produce a solution that deals with immigration, but it doesn't do that. How, what gave you the right to walk around? No policeman has the right to walk around and go check Home Affairs documents. It's like we work within a law here.
I've seen some crazy videos of Gaten doing some vigilante stuff.
It's to me, it's a sort of thing that's populist. It gets people riled up. And yeah, we all should think about immigration. But we must think about it soberly and sensibly. Not think about it in populist terms that are not helpful, actually, because We've just were speaking earlier about South Africans living abroad or South Africans working abroad. What if those nations were like, we're going to bust them out of here? Those are our own citizens. Sure, you might make the case, well, they are all meant to be legal. But if you're trying to go live in the UK today, there's a stringent way of you fill out forms, you do the job, but you will know sooner or later whether you are allowed to go there or not. You try and do that to come and live in South Africa.
It's like impossible.
It's like the Home Affairs it can't even give, so in certain Home Affairs departments, they can't even give South Africans proper documentation. How do you expect anyone to apply? But here's what's even worse about it.
But they also lose the documents so often. Like, I know people that have been applying for years and just, like, they get right to the final stages and documents get lost.
Yeah.
And then start again.
Or like even, and this issue for me, where it's very pernicious and wrong actually, is that it's anger directed at fellow Africans. You don't hear, you can go to the Atlantic seaboard. I bet you there are Americans, Russians, Swedes, everyone else there. They don't seem to have this problem, and no one is going out there saying abahambe. So it's clearly a populist message that is neglectful of the fact that we've got to have an immigration policy that says, how do we secure our walls, make sure that our borders are secure, make sure that anyone who comes into the country does so legally, and we give them a sense of legal certainty so that you have circular flow of immigration. How do we stop dictators like Robert Mugabe or Emerson Mnangagwa and all of them? How do we stop what's going on in Zimbabwe? How do we stop these dictators who are oppressing people? Mugabe was that, and then he's now handed over to, after he passed on, now he's got Mnangagwa doing the same there. It's madness. We've got to go there and figure out how to deal with that situation if you want to deal with immigration. And then ultimately be able to go, how do you maximize the skills that sit in the continent? There are some unbelievable geologists, chemists, various people in different parts of Africa who we could work with, and if we gave them visas, South Africa could benefit. We as a country don't have a complete set of skills and a monopoly on skills. We're great people, but in certain sectors we may be missing. If we have a shortage of maths teachers, what's the crime of being able to find maths teachers from another part of the world? Do they have to be a particular skin color for them to be allowed here?
And going back to Julius, right? You're talking about Julius Malema. So you rate the EFF is probably going to get between 10 and 12%.
I think so, yeah.
And when I look at Julius, he's so popular, especially online, right? Like, I see he has a huge following. And I always see his rallies are some of the biggest. Why do you think he is not a bigger competitor yet? Why do you think that he is still in that 10 to 12% range, where I see more people talking about him than Cyril Ramaphosa, Gayton McKenzie, John Steenhuisen? Why do you think that is?
South Africans are very conservative. We live in a society that likes to stick to particular rules. They don't like people who are anarchists. They don't like people who are rude. But they also, I think we know corrupt people when we see them, right? Like, and I'm not, I think South Africans are very discerning in that sense. I also do think that the EFF's policies people don't buy. People know instinctively that actually if you nationalize land and stop private property, this is for black South Africans. People don't want that. They want to own their own land. Why you want to nationalize it? People know these things. They often we disrespect people not thinking that they know what they understand policy. But I think citizens do, and I think that it's a bit of a misnomer for me so my impression of Julius is that he's like the guy who, if we were all protesting in a factory and he'd be like, the bosses are bad and this and that, which is the populist bit, everyone would be like, yeah, we agree with that guy. When you ask the same people, no one is going to say, we think this guy should go run the factory.
Okay.
No one thinks so.
So you're saying people like him, but they don't necessarily
think that he should run the country.
Yeah.
Like I like it. I follow Julius online, find him interesting. Do I think he should run this country? Absolutely not.
And do you think if he did win, right? Because I see a lot of people also saying that a lot of people are very scared of Julius, it seems.
A lot of white people are scared of Julius.
Yeah.
Black people don't care about it.
So I think a lot of white people are pretty scared of Julius, right? Why do you think that is?
Because I think also all of us are fascinated by interests. So when Julius gets up and sings songs like "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," you can appreciate that if you identify as a Boer in that sense, that's not a song that makes you feel comfortable. I also do think that assets, and remember, we're living in a country with profound contradictions and dichotomy. You've got to accept the fact that even when you have a conversation about land, for many white South Africans, it's a fear. For many black South Africans, it's a hope. Anyone who wants to lead this country must be able to understand the hopes and fears of another and actually try and work to bring those two together. And that's why I think is the hardest work of building one South Africa, is that it's easy to be a party that's just for blacks, or it's easy to be a party that's just for whites. It's actually hard work to try and bring them together.
For sure, yeah.
For those same things, because the hopes of one are the fears of another. And so when you hear of and I think people should also be worried about the chaos, because South Africans have watched Julius in Parliament. If you can't observe rules within Parliament in that, and you want to see it chaotic, you want to see it break down, South Africans don't want that for their country. They don't want that, because instability and chaos, we've already got so much violence. Why do you want to add more to it? So he's campaigning within a country that is like that. And I think, to me, I'm glad that they're at 10 or 12%, because it tells me that South Africans want something different. And when I think about even people who want to vote for us, I always think to myself, these are voters who like the idea of coming together, not divisions. I think South Africans actually they know that they want a government that works, but they know they want to create their own jobs. They know they want an education system that prepares them. They don't want extremes on either end. I think they're going to reject people like Dudula. I think they're going to reject things like what the EFF are producing. I think there's the inherent sense upon which we want something that works for all people. Because at the end of the day, whilst we are beautiful in our diversity, I also don't think South Africans are inherently racist. I think that we have some elements of racism in our country. I think we've got economic disparities naturally. But I certainly think that for many South Africans, they want to see black people and white people work together.
For sure.
It were South Africans who were lining up the streets welcoming Siya Kolisi and the Springboks, and they were celebrating them. We all were touched by the moment of Lisbeth, just celebrating Eben. That tells me that this country is beautiful. That tells me that this country is forever hopeful about race relations. So I think anyone who wants to divide us on the basis of race is really preaching a message that is archaic and is out of step with a society that wants a South Africa that works for everybody.
I want to know, if nothing changes in South Africa, where do you see South Africa in the next 20 years? If nothing changes, the ANC stays in power.
I'm not a prophet of doomsday, but look at the trend lines. The trend lines are GDP growth of just over 0.1 or 2%. That's nothing. That means that in essence that you can't catch up with the rate of unemployment relative to employment. The ANC is introducing Bantu education of some sort, because it's telling, because the dropout zones are in kids who are poor. You are telling them that they can stop going to school at grade 9, and they introduce this exit certificate. So what I think, if nothing changes, we will have a different form of separate development. We will be a little bit like maybe Argentina or countries like that, where you have an enclave of wealth, so a few people who end up with machine guns outside their doors of security, and a sea of poverty. And that is not the picture I want to see for this country. I think that we'll see more and more of that start to happen. And you'll start to have a few people being able to save themselves off government failure by creating private education, private security, private all of that, which we see. But you'll have a lot of people dependent on a failing government, which creates these conditions. So for me, I'm not this country is going to collapse just tomorrow morning. But I do think that we don't want a society that's like that. You don't want And it's worst case. You see countries like Venezuela and what they've been through when your healthcare stops working and people, if you are looking for medical help, you have to go overseas, where actually things like security don't work and you have to privatize that, then I think we're going to be in trouble. So this is a very crucial election. South Africans need to vote for change because this one matters.
I really do believe, and I think we saw a glimpse of it maybe during the massive riots that happened in Durban. But I do believe that people are so on the edge in South Africa, and I'm not also saying doomsday tomorrow, but I feel like if things don't change in a major way, people are going to start taking things into their own hands.
Yeah, and it's got other dangers, right? And one of the biggest dangers I think we face, and this was part of an international report looking into South Africa, you can look at counter-terrorism works, because when you've got a sea of unemployment, a young population, the median age in this continent will be in the next number of years 21, 19, 20. You are asking youth that is unemployed, hopeless. You think we have a gang problem in this country? We will have a terror problem, second to none, because you've got available manpower. It's doing nothing. So I do think we've got to do everything we can. If I could appeal to South Africans, and I know a lot of people say, but we don't know who to vote for. So, well, the short answer is vote for Bossa, but the more longer answer is that who do you want in the room? Because we know there must be 4 or 5 parties that must dance together to create a coalition for this country. So we already know John will be there. We already know Cyril is going to be there. My only question to you is, where else do you want there? Forget those parties. In essence, don't waste your vote on them, because they'll get what they get. Your vote must go to who do I want in the room, because whoever I have in the room, that's who's going to determine the future of this country and the values I want, the new ideas. That's why I always tell people, we want to be in that room, and you can put us in that room, because we can take the ideas that I've been talking about, how to fix ESCOM, how to fix Transnet, how to ensure people are safe, how do we fix our education system. We can put those ideas and force parties to behave in that regard.
For sure. And you're just about to release a book, right? By the time this comes out, the book will be released.
It'll be available at your nearest bookstore.
So what is the book about? Just give us a little brief description.
Dare to Believe, because I think leaders are dispensers of hope. It tells my own life story, where I grew up, my own faith. What does marriage mean for me and my wife and our kids? And then it goes into why the politics of this country, why the DA, why I left the DA. And it looks at what Parliament has failed to do. Why liberation politics. I have a chapter in there about liberation parties become oppressors, which answers the question you've just phrased to me. How do I view South Africa in the next while? I think the party that freed us will enslave us. It just happens all over the world. And then it concludes with a third of the book focused on the future of our country, the things I believe about the geopolitics, a multipolar world, and how Africa sits in there. It looks at how we can fix our education system. It looks at how we actually can put a job in every home. And probably the last chapter in the book, which is one of my favorite, is about, hey, we're a nation of superstars. How do we get more stars? That's what the book's about.
I asked people the other day to send in questions for you.
Yeah.
And the main question, which you just said is in the book, is why you left the DA. So I want to get into that a little bit. And if you can tell me as much as you're open to telling me, right? Obviously, the information will be in the book. But can you give us a bit more insight as to why you did leave the DA?
I joined the DA with a belief that it could be a party that works for all South Africans. And at the time, I genuinely thought that's what Helen Zille believes. That's what I genuinely thought. I thought coming into that space, here was a woman who was working to try and bring South Africans together, and she was the leader at the time. I thought that was the project, to be honest. And we knew that doing that project would have its own consequences. One of the consequences would be people on the extreme ends of that would leave. If you want a party that works, there are some white South Africans that want to work with black South Africans. They leave. They go to parties that are exclusively for whites. There are some black South Africans who don't want to work with white South Africans. Therefore, they leave for places that are exclusively black. So we knew we had to occupy the center and keep that in that. And for a long time it was working, because in 2016, South Africans heard us, and we were probably the most successful in that election. We were able to govern in more places than we've ever governed before. We achieved that great step in the right direction. And then post that, I think personal jealousies, a whole lot of issues started to creep in, that people didn't want this project to work because it was starting to have consequences on those who now, when they see an organization that no longer just is like just for them, it was for everybody, they started to create tensions. So when you look at the National Assembly list, I was very deliberate at I wanted more black South Africans on that list, because I didn't want a caucus just of whites. I wanted a diverse caucus. And there were some South Africans who took issue with that. Then there were certain instances where, at a personal level, there were personal attacks against me, my life. They were using newspapers to begin to attack, because suddenly you felt like the toxicity became this place that was genuinely unbearable. I'll say this because in October 2019, after the very difficult election earlier on, a few months back, when we lost Afrikaans voters to the Freedom Front Plus, the conditions inside the DA were so toxic. I hated going to work. And this is an organization you lead, right? So it became this awful place where I felt like every weekend I'd wake up to try and read a story about my life in a newspaper that was attacking of my family. I remember waking up one weekend and pictures of my house were planted everywhere as I was living in this mansion in Cape Town. And
is this the house that I dropped off the shoes at?
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
So
I can
it is
confirm
a mansion, right?
It's not a mansion.
You know what I mean? Like,
I was actually surprised how, if I say humble, the house was.
But the front page was Maimane's mansion. It was so unbelievable. So all of these stories then started to feature, because it felt like the DA at the time wanted to do everything it can to not only destroy my reputation, but to kill in me this dream that it was possible for blacks and whites to work together. And when you live in that context, I just said, I'd rather, out of principle, like I saw someone the other day say, you were earning so much money and then like now when it didn't work out, you wanted to leave. I said, I left that salary. I left that salary because it wasn't a lot of money. It's like what, like just over R1 million a year. I know it's a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah, but I mean, it's such a high-end position like that, yeah.
But I had to leave when I left, I didn't have this job that I had lined up. I just knew on principle I could not stay in a toxic environment that never wanted a vision for South Africa with people who were committed to making my life impossible. So I'm grateful. It was painful. It was hard. But I'm grateful I can sit here today and say I still believe we can build one South Africa. And that's why the book is Dare to Believe. Mm-hmm. But it's also why, had I stayed in the DA, I don't think I'd be sitting here today. I think I'd be not well or in some asylum or worse, health-wise, just in a mess. And I am, as difficult as that is, you've got to be able to move on and build what you believe in.
So you say, like, obviously it was very toxic and you were butting heads, right? Who are you butting heads with?
I think the current leadership of the DA, when I look at where they're at now, the DA has proved my thesis. I wanted to fight hard to, when Helen Zille was re-elected back into the position, it became a space for her to be able to, and I knew when she came back that we'd have days where she'd want a particular DA, a DA that was a fight back DA. When Tony Leon led the DA, they ran this campaign called Fight Back, which was a consolidation of minorities. I knew they would come back and want to build that coalition together. I knew the issues when we were fighting for issues where we felt like there were these people being marginalized. Let's go fight for them. I had to fight the governments to say, go deliver them. I remember sitting in a meeting at times and the current leadership fighting about, for example, we were governing in Johannesburg. I remember this all too well. And what we decided to do is to build more clinics in townships because healthcare is important and the city has a competence to deliver clinics. So we thought we'll build those. And I can remember people coming to meetings saying, in the suburbs where white South Africans live, the government is no longer cutting verges there, but here you are going to build clinics for black South Africans. I was like, so clinics are the same as verges? And I get property prices, I get economics. I'm doing a PhD now, so I'm hopefully going to try and understand it better. But I was shocked at the insensitivity that said we should be a party that's generous towards South Africans, particularly South Africans of color. And then there were minor incidents, like there were times where you'd look at a list in a council and you'd notice that black South Africans were lower down the list. And I'd say, why is this? And then people would tell me, no, these people scored higher. When I look at how they scored, like some of them didn't have post-school qualifications. They were just there because they were part of an arrangement of the partnership between the DA's National Party and the DA itself and the DP at the time to come back together. So when I look at this current leadership, I can see quite clearly their project is what is before us and it's different to mine. All the leaders inside the DA are white. All the mayors are white. And that's what the DA wants to be. Now I must free them to do that. And it's epitomized even when you see these last elections. Taking out adverts that, eventually you burn the flag on the thing.
How do you feel about that?
If you want to lead South Africa, any president of this country has one job. South Africa is a book. It's a story. It starts off let's start it in 94. Of course, we know there was South Africa before that. You can talk about the apartheid years. You can talk about colonial years. They form part of a story of the book of this country. But I started in 94 because that's when this flag we are discussing comes up. That flag was a triumph of South Africa over racism and racial discrimination called apartheid. That flag was given to us symbolically as an emblem of our constitution. It gave us what goes with our national anthem, which was a uniting feature. That same flag was the same flag that was hoisted when the Springboks won in 95. When we opened the World Cup in 2010, that was the same flag that in some ways, yes, was put outside the Constitutional Court when we fought the Zondo Commission, perhaps a dark time in our country. When Jacob Zuma was violating that flag, citizens were fighting. So this flag has seen good and bad. Your job as a leader is to say, how do I write the next chapter in the book? Not burn the book, because you're not going to be there. So my feeling about that advert was that it missed the South African story and said, well, if we're not the main protagonists in the story and then these ones come in, then this flag must be destroyed or can. So even if you call it symbolically, it symbolizes the worst. Because even in the height of apartheid, I dare ask the question, would the DA have stood up and burnt the apartheid flag? Would it have? And I'm not sure. But you're comfortable at taking out an advert saying you can burn the new South African flag with all that story. So with every bit that burns, you're not just burning an ANC EFF coalition here. If you thought that was the coalition you must burn, then take out an advert with an ANC flag and an EFF flag and then say those will burn this country. Free. Those are competitors. But that flag means so much more. It means so much more. And so to watch it in an advert where it's been railed back, I think to me is the worst, is extreme form of right-wingism. I almost thought to myself, I didn't know whose party it was when I first saw it. I thought, this looks like Eugene Terreblanche could do this. And then I realized it wasn't.
So I mentioned earlier that I want to talk about some of the biggest problems, right, that South Africans face. And I want you to give like an in-depth solution or a plan, right, that you would have for those issues.
I mean, let's take one, jobs. Right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest issue. And I think to myself, you must look at jobs in twofold. Jobs are like a garden, right? Let's take South Africa, a country like a garden. You have conditions within that garden and you have plants within that garden. So let's talk about conditions as the economy. First conditions are about how do you fix energy? You're not going to grow an economy without energy. So fixing Eskom is a priority. And what I'd like to suggest is that we introduce SMRs, which produce a base load of energy that keeps energy stable. Secondly, you reduce demand by ensuring that hospital, schools, and clinics have got rooftop spacing upon which you can take them off the grid theoretically because they reduce demand and you can avoid load shedding. And you also ensure that Eskom is fiscally sustainable because otherwise it drains your resources that you can spend on other things. The second is fixing logistics, Transnet. If goods can't move in and out of the country, you can't do anything because you can't export markets, you can't import things. So fix Transnet and break it up into its component parts so that there's a private-public partnership that fixes the ports, but you also can make sure that passenger rail can move because someone who lives in Atlantis needs to easily get to work and be on a reliant public transport. Otherwise, we go back to the issue earlier on we were talking about.
I mean, I see people that come from Atlantis into town, and it's like they're spending like 3 hours a day just traveling to work. It's
insane.
Nuts.
Well, you tell me anyone who's going to build their family in that context, right?
Yeah.
And how much income? You talk about the end of the money. You're spending 40% of your income getting to work. Eventually, you stop thinking, well, it's easier for me to sleep in the streets in town because then I can take that 40% back. See, so we mustn't forget these things. The third dynamic to the issue is that we've got to be aggressive at skilling of our young people. Education is crucial. If you don't ask young people to pass from 30% to 50%, you're going to struggle. So one of the suggestions we've put on the table is to voucherize education. Let's give all South Africans a right to choose where they want their kids to go to school because when they've got a voucher, they can decide where I'm going to go. I can choose a school. But let alone the voucher thing. It's about also improving maths and science and introducing subjects like robotics mandatory in school because you're preparing kids for an economy that's going forward. But it's also about fixing the first 1,000 days of a child, and that begins in utero. May there never be a pregnant woman who goes to bed hungry. Because when a pregnant woman goes to bed hungry, you are impairing the development of the fetus, which means that by the time the child is born, there's potential that they're malnourished, stunted, and they can't hit their economic potential. So let's make sure that there's some maternal support for parents, for particularly mothers who are pregnant. And then, fourthly, we've got to make sure our communities are safe. You're not going to invest. You go to communities like Mitchell's Plain, etc. When you want to try and roll out broadband infrastructure, there's certain gangs that sometimes can tell you, no, you can't, or you can't invest here. We've got to free up communities so that they are easier to work in. And then lastly, let's build broad infrastructure on a few things. One, water, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure so that goods can move in and out, and then ultimately digital infrastructure because I want for every child to be a digital citizen. So those are the conditions. You got to make it possible.
Yeah.
Right? On the plans bit, let's stimulate SMMEs so that actually small businesses can be able to thrive in communities. Jobs are not created by big industries like mining, etc. Always. They're created by SMMEs because those are people who are able to hire people. You start a plumbing company, you want a guy to help you. You help artisans, you help the skills base to do that. And we've proposed a 220 billion rands investment into that because we can find in townships that economy can grow. The second dynamic in that is about making sure we introduce what is called a national civilian service. I want young people to be able to work for a year, 6 months interning, 6 months learning. Thirdly, you devolve policing to make sure that actually you can partner regional police. You can make it regional police, but you also include private security and you also include a national youth corps of young people that can work within the police so that we increase the eyes on criminals rather than the other way around. So you've got to do that. Then we focus on key sectors like manufacturing. As an example, you and I use a kettle and a microwave every single day. But the reality of it is that 4% of kettles are manufactured in this country. The bulk are imported. We should be able to do more, focus on that. And then lastly, we adjudicate on things like land, because once people are owners of land. How did I get through school? It was because my mother got a title deed. She built for herself a two rooms and a garage. She leased them out. She had an income. She could help me. It's because she had title. So if you do that, you can see that the economies begin to grow because people are able to help themselves. There are other macroeconomic things that I could talk about the rate of savings, how people save so that you can purchase that economic growth. But my proposal in that is to create what is called a Jobs and Justice Fund where people can contribute to that. Then you can take that capital to stimulate these micro enterprises, to help fund new industries, and to ensure that the future of South Africa, in partnership with Africa, is a job driver and a GDP that is growing. Because then you create battery technology, you can do all of that as a future pathway for South Africa, especially in a universe that's transitioning into an environmentally sustainable world. This is our biggest opportunity, man.
So, I mean, these all sound fantastic, right? But there's so many people in positions of power that are holding a lot of this back from happening, right? There's so many corrupt officials. How would you go about removing them from positions of power?
Short answer is start with the most senior people. Don't renew their contracts. The civil service is not damaged because everyone in the civil service doesn't want to do their job. It's damaged because you've got a lot of senior leaders who are appointed because they are loyal to a particular party, and they are promoted because they are loyal to a particular party, not because they know what they're doing. And so I would work with the Public Service Commission to craft what the job specs in respective departments are, and then ensure that in the first 100 days you appoint the best. You want the best ministers. You want the best DGs. Because once you've done those two things, the culture seeps into the organization. What I've seen is that countries who have moved up the pathway, Japan, South Korea, it's an honor to work for the state, not an excuse, not I've got nothing else to do, so I'll go work for government. The best CA works in the department. The professors are clamoring to go work for the state because it's a place where people are well remunerated, as they are in South Africa, but the best only work there.
You also mentioned load shedding, right? And obviously for the past 50 or so days, there's been no load shedding.
It's on holiday.
Yeah. So do you think that the ANC have found a miraculous solution to our problem? Or do you think that the day after elections or the night of elections, the power is going to go off?
Of course. What have they done that's uniquely different? The only thing I can say, tick, okay, they've done this, is a maintenance plan. But they haven't built new infrastructure. Actually, the only thing that saved us now in this load shedding period in some ways is the reduction of demand, because more and more industries have figured out that the government isn't going to do anything. So they've just taken themselves off the grid. As you see households, you see all of that. You see schools starting to do that. But the truth of the matter is that the government has not done anything special. They will burn diesel. If they don't burn diesel, they'll have to rely on maintenance of their current fleet. But the current fleet of energy is never going to produce enough energy for us to grow. So even if you end up just in a state of just lower levels of load shedding, the truth is load shedding will come back, because the load shedding is a function of what they call the electricity availability factor. It's a function of how much energy is available relative to how much demand is being placed. If you want to grow your economy, you avail more energy because there'll be more consumers, more factories, more jobs. But what we've done is, in a GDP growth that's so low, we haven't been able to keep the lights on. What happens when we want to grow that? We can't, because we just don't have energy. So we've got to increase the availability of energy so that new economies can sprout out of that. Those are the conditions I'm talking about. Because no one is going to invest in a country where they are unclear they'll have energy. Just never going to happen.
For sure. And I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit about load shedding, right? But how would you go about properly fixing the system so that one day there is no load shedding at all?
Energy in this country, right? I think this country consumes about 26,000 megawatts of energy per day. So you need to know how to build for that. 70% of that comes from coal-fired power stations. And along with that, so you've got to say to yourself, how do you, if 70% of your load comes from coal, the problem that load shedding derives is when your coal-fired power stations are old and they're old infrastructure, they go out of maintenance. So every time you take them off to go into a maintenance space, you reduce capacity, and that's what load shedding is an outcome of. It's government confusion, literally. So my practical thing is to support base load so that you end up at a consistent level. You've got to introduce what is called small modular reactors, which are a type of safe nuclear that you put into the grid. Nuclear is helpful because if you
nuclear is incredible.
If you think about coal, the problem with coal is that it fluctuates. Nuclear is stable all the way through. So, and we've not far from here, there's a nuclear power plant. So you introduce those so that you augment for the 26,000, so that you always have base load. That's the main thing. And while you do that, yes, there are environmentalists that are saying nuclear is not, but nuclear now we're building technology that's able to help us produce sustainability around. That's not environmentally damaging. So what you then also introduce is that you start to reduce your coal supply, your coal fleet, by decommissioning them and adding things like hydrogen, gas, and wind technology so that you become more and more sustainable. That's about dealing with the supply of energy. On the other side, you incentivize citizens to decrease demand by making sure that they themselves are introducing tech. So when it comes to a mine, let me give you a practical one. You give them what is called a build, own, operate model, which means that a mine can build its own substation, if you like, a small power supply, and they can sell that energy, wheel it back into the grid, back into municipalities that have got the capability to do that. And then you reduce demand progressively because your big energy consumers are things like smelters, etc. You want to reduce those so that you keep a stability of energy over a period of time. And then lastly and practically, create a SADC grid where you can be able to partner with SADC countries, particularly those who've got gas, because then you can introduce that into your grid and keep stability of energy. Load shedding is not something we should live with. I say give me 2 years. It'll be done.
You reckon you could do it that quick?
2 years. 2 years. The reason we've had load shedding for now, I think load shedding will be eligible to vote at the next elections. That's how old it is now. But the harsh reality of it is that we've had policy indecision. We've had corruption. That's what led us to load shedding. So corruption is part of taking, you don't even buy coal that's sitting next to the power station. You have to wheel coal from another part of the country and then move it with these trucks because there are contracts. And you find coal that is being now burnt there is substandard. That's why you hear of things like wet coal, grey coal, all of that sort of language. So to me, to the suggestions, to build an SMR is a 2-year project. You can introduce that into the grid. This is not rocket science. Everyone has to eradicate corruption, make sure it's fiscally sustainable. 2 years. That's all I ask. If the government can do it before elections, and this is a drunk government, just imagine what you would do with a competent one that knows what the next 2 years look like. That's very possible.
I think so too.
My irritation is this.
I just feel like if you put the funds in the right place, it's possible.
My irritation is that you've had, for far too long, South Africa, we've been living with this, woe is us. This is not a unique problem. Countries know what happens when demand outstrips supply. Countries have done it. We're not the first. Load shedding is not unique. Poland had the similar problem. They didn't take 16 years to fix it. So let's not, we like to treat ourselves as victims. No, we're not. We got to triumph over this. And wouldn't it be amazing if you just stood up and said, load shedding is a thing of the past. Let's move on, people.
It'd be incredible, Because I think over the past few weeks or month or two, right, people kind of have forgotten about it because it's so pleasant. It's like it's just been in the back of our minds. It feels like it won't come back, but it's inevitable.
Yeah, the mood, it's a mood stabilizer, right?
It's a power play because I think everyone's really...
Zimbabwe didn't have energy problems before elections. So let that be a lesson for all of us.
How do you feel about the NHI bill? And can you explain what that is and what impact that will have on South Africa?
NHI is a type of health insurance where the state uses what is called a single payer model. So everyone contributes towards a fund. That fund looks at all assets and it pays, and it's like that's the, so it in some ways it doesn't help private medical aid companies, and then furthermore doesn't mean that it is able to meet the objectives on the other end of making sure there are competent hospitals, etc. Because, so for example, they've borrowed this model in some ways from countries like Canada, which are single payer models. So Canada has got an income distribution where people are fairly similar. And so what happens invariably is that, people can gain access to healthcare, but for particular procedures, it takes too long, etc. To me, I believe in a hybrid model, which means that citizens are entitled to have private medical aid and ultimately can opt into a scheme of public health insurance. And so when you have the combination of both, you've got to do a few things. Fix the state assets so that people can utilize them better. Because even if you're a private medical aid holder, if you want to go to the best liver specialists in the country are in Grooteteskeur, you can go there. It's the best. It's a public hospital. But your medical aid should be able to pay for that, right? If you are a poor person who lives in Limpopo and you want to go see a doctor, but you want to see a GP who's down the road from you, you should go there, and the public health insurance, the state health insurance must pay for it. And it underwrites that transaction. So at a primary level, everyone can use assets across both. At a tertiary level, you can be able to be put into your medical aid. And often, with the mistake that this bill might do, and I'm still studying it further, is to ask that people who are working contribute to the fund. The dilemma with it is once they stop working in the fund or stop working, you can dump a whole lot of elderly people into the public health who are at their most vulnerable, which is dangerous. Actually, you don't want that. You want for people to be able to procure their own private health because they can stay for a long period of time in that stage, and you don't have to burden public funds on that. And my opposition to this current NHI bill is that it's going to be extraordinarily expensive. We can't afford it. The government doesn't have money. This is the thing. For every R1 that comes into this country, it's spent either to welfare or it's spent to paying off civil servants. The third thing is that it's spent on debt. There's literally no excess money for funding of vanity projects like NHI. So I heard Ramaphosa say something quite clever. I thought, that is the point. He said, now we've just bought ourselves a Rolls Royce. I'm like, you're poor. You can't afford a Rolls Royce. What you should be buying is a cheap car, or it's a working car, a reliable car. Buy a Toyota, not a Rolls Royce. And they've gone out and procured a Rolls Royce, which they can't afford to service, can't afford to pay for. And that's all NHI is. It's just this big, fancy thing that actually will cripple our healthcare system.
And why do you think now? Why has this come about right now?
Elections, baby, elections. They worked this thing out and they said, what can we make our signature policy position for the election? And then we can say to the people we delivered national health insurance, vote for us, which is nonsense. They are going to hurt people. And I can tell you now, Robert Mugabe did this thing. He died in a country foreign from his. If you want more, because I guess the challenge which we put out is to say, let them cancel their medical aid then. They're so confident about their system. Cancel your medical aid. See where you end up.
Another thing is, I think as a politician, right, you go to places that most people generally don't go. And you meet people that a lot of people wouldn't meet. And I feel like it's quite similar to what I do in that small aspect, right? As someone that's lived in South Africa for most of his life, I've seen so many different things because of the work I do. And it's taken me into areas that most people that I'm close with, friends with, don't go into, right? And I've seen so many of these things that I think a lot of it is normal and that everyone knows about what is actually going on in other neighborhoods around Cape Town, the Western Cape, South Africa, right? I want to know from you, what are some of the things that you've seen in this line of work that has really just shocked you to your core? What has been some of the things that you've seen and gone, people need to know this is happening?
It must have been, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I went to the Northern Cape. Northern Cape's an interesting province, right? Here's this province, it's fewer in proportion. There are fewer citizens in the Northern Cape, majority of which are coloured South Africans, and the race is irrelevant in this issue, but it's got economic wealth as far as agriculture is concerned. And so I go into this township and I arrive in this house. It's got a few houses within it, or dwellings, or what this community told me they call them ghettos. So they've got these ghettos all around them, is what they tell me. And as I'm busy talking I see there are a lot of children and maybe 4 or 5 adults. And I look to the corner of my eye and I see this woman. She's holding a lemon and she's got salt with her. And she's busy spraying salt on this lemon on her. And she's eating that. So I asked the woman who I'm talking to, why is that woman doing that? This woman says to me, this is the only thing she can eat if she's going to take antiretrovirals, which are for HIV and AIDS. That to me was the most disturbing thing I've seen, because that's an intersect of everything that falls apart in a society. It's a home where people don't work. There's not a single person working in that whole community. It's a place where healthcare doesn't reach people. And yes, they were able to get ARVs, but they had no food to eat the ARVs. If you've ever taken antibiotics on an empty stomach, you will know. Because And I wasn't sure the kids had hope. And I can't live like that. So seeing that was for me probably in this campaign, one of the toughest moments I've ever seen.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think I've been kind of so desensitized to it, right? But I've seen so many things that have stuck with me. Also, something that recently that I saw was in Dunoon Township, where I did a short documentary there recently. There was this train track, and along the train tracks, there's just shacks all around it, right? Mm. And I don't think the railway there's active anymore, but there's just shacks all around it. There's farm animals everywhere, and there's just sewerage running down the middle. So like through the train tracks, it's almost like it's a river, right? In the train tracks, on the sides of the train tracks, it's everywhere. And it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, right? And just conditions that no people in the world should be living in. I'll show you a picture just now. It's horrific. And these, like all the animals are eating this trash, eating this sewage. And I was doing a video, and next thing I see, this little kid, it must be 3 or 4 years old, walking through this sewage, completely barefoot, by himself. There was not a parent in sight. He was in a one-piece pajamas, and he was just walking through the sewage like he does it every day. It wasn't like he didn't even think about it, right? And I stopped him, started talking to him, and you could see that he was obviously mentally, there was something wrong, right? I'm not too sure what, but you could see it in his eyes. And just like stuff like that is happening all around us all the time.
And when we talk about one South Africa, it's also diagnostically that there are many South Africas, and that's a South Africa we don't talk about enough.
But it's also like it's happening within so close proximity of each other, where it's like you've got Camps Bay where people are driving around in Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and then you've got this kid literally 20-minute drive away, walking through shit barefoot with an illness where he should probably have so much medical supervision, be in hospital, be having treatment, be on medication, and there's just nothing. I mean, even his parents weren't there because they probably had to go to work. Like,
I see it, the movie you're describing is a movie you see so often, you see so in so many different places. You just see such absolute... When mothers in the Eastern Cape are just boiling leaves to feed their kids, you must understand there's something not... And the numbers are starting to show for it, right? more than half of our citizens are living below the upper poverty line. So the numbers are starting to show up. And that's why, man, like, I think we've got to build a depth within us that is so conscious of all of South Africa rather than just the South Africa we live in. We cannot be exiled from one another. It is important for a child who's grown up wealthy to go work in a poor community, in as much as a poor child can work in a wealthy community, because it helps heal each other. It helps us see each other for what this country is about, and we can build on from there. If we fail to do that, we will always have separate development, because I cannot tell you in that community that those children will drop out of school. You'll have other problems of crime and violent crime. And that's a society that what those young people grow up in. That's why I want this National Civilian Service, because I think you are privileged in the sense that you are able to experience that and then know that it's a dissonance from where you've grown up in. I want all South Africans to experience what other South Africans go through, because when someone comes up with a solution for medical devices, they can think about all of South Africa, not just a medical device that is reliant on permanent energy. You can create a medical device that's maybe not dependent on energy, because you're going to reach a rural community that doesn't have energy. I have a friend of mine who's busy building toilets that are not reliant on the traditional way of flushing the toilet, because you think about it, whether you go make a wee or whatever, you go flush and you lose 2 liters, but you don't need all liters to flush. Like, I mean, I don't know how much urine is, a few milliliters.
Yeah.
Why are we taking a few milliliters of urine and flushing it away with liters? You see, it's like not the economics of it doesn't make sense. He's worked out a model where you can almost reduce the amount of water that you use different technology, and ultimately it deals with the question of sanitation, which is a global issue, but more serious in South Africa. So what we could do is, rather than having pit latrines, could we not come up with solutions that give dignity to people in as far as sanitation is concerned? It's a powerful innovation. So, but it's said that it's come up with someone who, comes from overseas and is looking at this thing, and it'll be good for the international market. But I want for all South Africans, when we start to think about solutions, they can't just be solutions that are applicable to one LSM. They need to be applicable to all the people.
For sure.
I mean, you were speaking about survey earlier on. People are like, let's talk about period poverty, right?
Serengezi, yeah.
Yeah, people don't realize that actually women in this country, there are so many young girls that are dropping out of school because they can't afford sanitary towels. Like, that's insane. We can't live in a country where a young girl can't go to school because she doesn't have sanitary towels, or she has to use cow dung as sanitary towels. And so they've worked out how to create vending machines to distribute dignified sanitary pads to young girls in schools. All of us, every company that's got a corporate social investment must be buying this thing and doing that, because immediately it gives dignity to a woman. I think the first violence many young girls face is when they've got blood running down their legs and don't have any recourse from that. Let's build dignity in this country.
I think another thing that you were saying there is, like, you can't come up with solutions, right? If everyone's seeing things from their own, they look at their own problems and they're like, we need to make the solutions fit our problems, right? And another video that I did where I went to stay at Caroline's house. Caroline's our housekeeper, right? I went to go stay at her house in Dunoon, and for me, even though I've gone to these areas for years and I've worked with people in these areas, I've talked about them so many times, that was the first time I had slept in a township. And that really did change the feeling of me being there, because generally when you go to a dangerous place, or you go to a place like...
An unfamiliar place,
yeah, so a better word. It's very uncomfortable, right? But a lot of the time you can leave. And even though I could leave, obviously, after in the morning when I woke up, it was still that feeling of, I'm going to be here tonight. And it really, when I went home, I was so confused. Honestly, I started fighting with my parents because I was so angry about certain things. I was so upset, and I really didn't know how to feel for so long after that just one day experience, because I couldn't believe how so many people that I work with or that I'm friends with are living in this country. And I think people in the more privileged areas see things as like, we need to make things as good as possible for us and keep it this way, right? But if they had to experience even a day in the shoes of someone like Caroline, I feel like they would have a very different perspective of it, because I think so many South Africans are so removed from the issues that the majority of South Africans are facing.
Yeah, and so many wealthy South Africans, because for so many, that's their reality. The majority of our people live in, and like, that's why I'm passionate about this One South Africa project, is because I've grown up with both. I've lived in Soweto, worked in wealthy areas, live in fairly high LSM communities, and you live with a sense of going, okay, it's possible for us to create pathways for all our kids, but we best know where they're coming from. That's why whenever someone says to us, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you tell that child who was trolling through sewage that they've got boots that they can pull themselves up by. You tell that family. Good luck to you. So that's why when people are corrupt, in the context you've just described, how insulting that is.
Yeah, because you know whether, like, you come from there. How could you turn your back on people that literally used to be your next door neighbor?
Yeah, you are stealing.
That's what is mind-blowing to me. It's like... Yeah.
And fair enough. We also can't lament. We also can't blame only the corrupt. But that's why I also get frustrated by businesses who don't get involved. We got to invite all of us. And I know they might say we pay taxes, but it's not enough in some ways, because we need businesses that can say, what school can we adopt that we can make a difference in that school? If each one of us do something where we are, we could build a truly prosperous nation.
Mmusi, thank you so much for coming down today. And I actually listened a lot more than I usually do on this one, because I really do believe that your intentions are in the right place. And I think the work that you guys are doing is really incredible. You know, Civ is someone I also respect really highly. And
that's my brother.
He's only got great things to say about you, and I know he keeps it real. So I know he knows what he's talking about. So once again, thank you so much for coming down today. And do you have anything that you want to end off with?
No, I mean, I think the most important thing is that we mustn't be fatalistic about our country. We must show up and vote, make a difference. And I'm telling people, vote for Bossa, man. Your vote will matter. It will matter. It'll put us in the room. It'll make sure that we can fight for these things, because the more of us are there, the better it is for our argument. And so come, go vote, 29th May. Go do it.
Awesome. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wide Awake Podcast, and I'll see you all very soon. Cheers.